Well, good morning, church. How are we doing this morning? Good? We awake? Alive? Is anybody just savoring maybe the last few moments of fall break? If you were on fall break, I know students, you guys are. Teachers, you guys definitely are. Back at it tomorrow. But I'm excited because we're starting a new series today. And not only are we starting a new series, we're starting a series about a book that is one of my favorites in the Old Testament. Now, you may be familiar with this book, or you may not. I asked my barber the other day, I said, hey, do you know who the prophet Jonah was? He said, I got really no clue. I said, nothing comes to mind. I said, there's usually like one word that comes to mind when people say Jonah. He couldn't find it. But for those of us, maybe you were raised in church or you've been around church, you've been around a VBS. If I say Jonah and the whale, yeah, you got it. Jonah and the whale. The whale is kind of even more famous than Jonah in this book, right? Because it's like the whale. Now, granted, if you were raised on a paraphrase, you said, well, if you were raised on a word for word, it's big fish. Okay, Jonah and the big fish. Now, we're going to be walking through this for the next 4 weeks. And before I forget, I want to let you know we have a daily devotional for the book of Jonah. So it's basically 30 instances of devotions in the book of Jonah. So you can walk along with us as we're kind of going through this book together. It's both available in print here and then also on the app online. So if you want to follow along with us and kind of walk through, you'll have some questions and some thoughts on several verses every day as we move through the book of Jonah. So I want to encourage you with that. If you want to be involved in that for your daily quiet time, that'd be a great place to start, even with this Old Testament book that I think you're going to actually find is a story like no other. That in many ways, it is powerful, it is challenging, it is artistic, it is laugh out loud funny. It is also deeply emotionally honest in many different ways. And on top of that, by the end of the book, we're going to realize that God is making a challenge through the book that really is so honest and so raw that it is a miracle of his own spirit that the book actually made it in the canon. Because a lot of times we don't like critique. And so the fact that this book sits as a pretty challenging critique to all of us in the middle of the Old Testament speaks to the fact that the Lord made sure that it got nestled in there. So, if you have your copy of God's Word, we're going to go to the Old Testament. You may have to go to your concordance, or if you have a phone, it's got a concordance for you. But we're going to go to Jonah. He's considered one of the minor prophets. So, Jonah is one of the minor prophets. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few seconds. But have you ever felt the tension of wondering if you were religiously okay with God? Stop and think for a moment. You know, there are some people around us, maybe in our world or in our orbit, and we look at them and we think, man, that person, they are holy or they are religious. They're the kind of people that come into your office maybe on Monday morning. They're like, oh, I'm doing the Daniel fast. And you're like, oh, cool. It's like, I'm on day 21. You're like, oh, great. I did the Daniel fast once for 21 minutes. You know what I mean? They set spiritual goals and they accomplish them. You know what I mean? And so you're just kind of like in awe of the ability of that person's character or holiness or spirituality. And it may lead you to think, it may lead you to say, is God closer to that person than he is to me? Because, I try some of those things, but I just fall flat on my face. Or I just can't seem to find the right connection. Or there's just an issue. And then you may take it a step further. You may say, okay, well, this person, is it just like favoritism? Like, are there some people that are wired for godly things, and there are some people that are wired not for godly things? And like, I'm obviously one of the not for godly things people, and I just can't seem to get it right. and we look around and we start to compare ourselves spiritually to other people. And quickly, if you're in the room and you're kind of like me, you start to feel the pressure of, man, maybe I'm just not matching up. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Am I getting into heaven? Am I a good person? Like, what is going on? And so we feel this tension of our spiritual relationships. And even Christians that have been at this game for a long time, you understand that in some ways, holiness leads to a little bit of distance between you and the normalcy of the world. And so, really, Christians that are seasoned Christians, holy Christians that are pursuing Jesus with heart, soul, mind, and strength, sometimes have to work to build bridges back to people so that they can relate and come alongside and learn about Jesus. There's a show I was watching the other day on the Discovery Channel, and there were these 3 nuns on the show, okay? And they live in a cloister, and they make honey and all this, but they were very, very awkward. Yeah, I know that's hard to believe, but, and you just realize, oh, okay, spirituality does not necessarily necessitate being a person that can connect with another human being and be genuine. But Jesus never had that problem. Jesus was perfectly holy and also able to connect with people on a genuine human level. And so that process, like I was saying, even for older Christians, is a continual, intentional process that we all go through. So this morning, I want us to open up to the book of Jonah, and I want us to investigate that question. Does God give more spiritual opportunities and blessings to a certain group of people than he does to others? Does he choose arbitrarily who's going to be his favorite and who kind of gets thrown out? So beginning in the book of Jonah, we're going to go to Jonah 1:1. We're going to start with the very first verse. And I want to give you a little bit of background on the book of Jonah because I think it'll help you kind of appreciate where we're at. So in the kingdom of Israel at this time, the book of Jonah finds itself in the middle of a civil war. So they're actually, when you get to your Old Testament, you're reading through the Old Testament, you got to be careful because sometimes it'll say the kingdom of Judah, sometimes it'll say the kingdom of Israel. And the reason it says those things is because actually those were 2 divided kingdoms that were once one kingdom under David. And so under David and Solomon, they were the kingdom of Israel. They were the kingdom of Judah in some ways, but the name was the kingdom of Israel. And so after Solomon's son came to power, there was a rebellion because he was a leader that kind of demonstrated pride and also lack of compassion for the people. And so they split into north and south. And so you had the northern kingdom, which continued to be called Israel, and was every tribe except for basically Judah and Benjamin. And then you had the southern tribes, and they were the kingdom of Judah. Now, Judah was the place where you still had Jerusalem and the temple. So, and it was also the lineage of David. So you had the kingdom of Judah, which was ruled by the lineage of David. Everybody else had rebelled and lived in the northern kingdom. And because these 2 kingdoms had split, it created political turmoil. In fact, in a lot of ways, just like our Civil War, they put their capitals literally across the street from each other, okay? So when you're having a war, maybe the best idea is not to put your most important city, the closest to their most important city, okay? But that's kind of what they did. You had Jerusalem, and then you had areas in northern Israel that served as the capital in a lot of different eras. And so these 2 were continually fighting, and because they were continually fighting, they were weak. And because they were weak, there was an invasion from outside powers. And so the first invaders were the Assyrians. And the Assyrians came in, and ultimately what happens is they conquer the northern kingdom. So Assyria comes in, and through a process of sieges and battles, takes most of the major cities in northern Israel. Then you have the southern tribes that were still there as the kingdom of Judah, and they lingered much, much longer. In fact, they lingered longer than the Assyrians had an empire. But by the time the Assyrians basically had been taken over and redistributed by the Babylonians come in and swipe out the rest of what we know as Israel. And from then on, they may have had different name states or different moments of where they called themselves certain things. But from that point on, they were pretty much puppet governments that were run by these powers: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria. And so the book of Jonah comes at a very important time, which is the beginning of that harassment of the northern kingdoms. So Judah is still intact. Jonah is from Israel, the northern kingdom, and Assyria starts to invade the northern tribes. While it's doing this, Assyria is pretty famous for some travesties of humanity and of war. In fact, in one of the king's palaces in Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, there is a big stone etching of a siege of an Israelite city. So that's how we know this is actually historical fact. It's validated by the Bible, but it's also validated by archaeological evidence. And it's the siege of the Israelite town of Lachish. Can you say Lachish? Lachish. And what you have featured at Lachish is the, really, it's just inhumane beyond. There are women and children being shattered by Assyrian soldiers on the rocks, like just taken and beaten like clubs upon the rocks. You have Assyrian soldiers throwing men and women off of cliffs. You have soldiers mutilating, cutting, murdering the men as they're being laid to siege and conquered at Lachish. And so this stone etching hangs in the palace in the capital. So you can imagine the king of Syria going by and be like, hey, this is one of my favorite memories. When I took over Israel and was at the siege of Lachish, look, here's my men dashing all these babies against the rocks because they were a brutal and terrible people. And in so a lot of ways, they had technological advancement, but they did not have moral advancement. In fact, a lot of times they used the technological advancement to continue the moral depravity, to continue the evils of conquering that they used in and amongst the people of Israel. And by this point, several of these instances has happened. So you can understand, if you were a northern Israelite, you did not like the Assyrians. The Assyrians had killed your women. They had taken and thrashed your babies. They've taken your cities and men and taken them into slavery and killed them indiscriminately. And now, this is where we find the book of Jonah. On top of that, I want to make one last little point before we dive into the text. The point is that Jonah is a prophet that is a little bit different in its story. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you think of Isaiah, if you think of Jeremiah, if you think of even Elijah or Elisha, you see that many times the understanding of who they are is based on the words that they preach. Isaiah is all the words that Isaiah preached. Jeremiah is all the words that Jeremiah preached. And so the prophet, you are informed of the prophet by his words. Well, with Jonah, there's very little of his actual prophetic preaching. And in fact, the one instance we have of Jonah outside of Jonah is in 2 Kings. And in 2 Kings, Jonah has some interesting things to say. 2 Kings 14:25, if you ever want to know it for Bible Jeopardy. 2 Kings 14:25 says that Jonah was basically given the license to go to Jeroboam II, which he was a king of northern Israel at the time, tribes leader, chieftain, whatever you want to call the kings that ended up being in northern Israel, and tell him a prophecy that was good. Basically, Jeroboam was a terrible guy. He was a pretty impactful historical figure in the land of Israel, but overall, the prophets and the kings declare him as to be not worthy of the line of David, not following the law, a sinner, someone that continued pagan idolatry. But for one brief respite of mercy in 2 Kings 14:25, Jonah is allowed to go to Jeroboam II and preach a prophecy basically of prosperity, to give him some control over some land that he had been disputing with. He said, the Lord will give this to you. Now, don't lose sight of the fact that literally Amos, who wrote the book of Amos, later comes back and has to tell Jeroboam, hey, because of your disobedience, what Jonah said is out the window. Like, you will face judgment. But Jonah got to basically give a bad king a good prophecy, and that's all he preaches. That's all he preaches. That's the only other instance we have of Jonah's preaching outside of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament. And so, we have this character of Jonah. In fact, Jonah, he is the son of a man named Amittai. Can you say Amittai? Amittai. And Jonah means dove. And Amittai means truth. So Jonah is perfectly named. He is the little dove of truth. The little dove of truth. Jonah, son of Amittai. And so this little dove of truth, we're going to discover in this book, is challenged by God in a powerful way. And you can understand why he would be the main character, right? Jonah's prophetic lineage is really just telling a guy what he wanted to hear one time. He's the perfect candidate for God to use to say, hey, let me see how much you're actually willing to surrender. Let me see how much you're actually willing to obey. Let me see where you're willing to go. And so the little dove of truth has to engage in the story of Jonah. And we discover pretty quick that he may not be quite such an innocent little dove so much as a corrupted serpent that's trying to figure out his way. Because in a lot of ways, the story of Jonah is a satire. And what I mean by that is it's like a comedy. The best way I can describe it, every character in the book of Jonah is going to hit the nail on the head. So what I mean is they represent something. Like Jonah represents the prophet. He is going to hit the nail on the head on what the prophet does. There are pagans in the story. They hit the nail on the head on what a pagan was expected to do. And the reason that is because the story is told a specific way. I'll give you an example. Jesus taught in the same way when he used the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, you may say, well, did the Good Samaritan happen or not? Well, it may have been based off of something Jesus actually witnessed and saw, but the story itself is designed with a purpose to teach a meaning. Right? So like the priest that comes walking down the road, nail on the head. We all know that's a priest. The Levite who comes walking down the road, nail on the head. That's a Levite. Even their resistances to helping the man. The Samaritan comes down the road. We all know he's bad. We all know he's a terrible person. All of a sudden, the Samaritan does something out of character. So it's this narrative device that you use to teach the point of a story. Jonah is wrapped up in satire like that. Now, if I haven't put you to sleep yet, we're going to go ahead and step right into the book, because I wanted you to understand those points as we begin verse 1. So, the first point of the sermon is this: Jonah was a prophet who did not act like a prophet. Jonah was a prophet who did not act like a prophet. Beginning in verse 1. The word of the Lord came to the little innocent dove. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their evil has come up before me. Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the Lord's presence. So the Lord appears to Jonah. He says, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh, the great city of Nineveh, and I want you to preach that their evil has come up to me, and now I'm going to overturn them. I'm going to judge them. And you are going to be the one that delivers my message. And so what does Jonah do? He says, God, you're crazy. He says, don't you know what just happened at Lachish? Like, they will kill me if I go to Nineveh. I know I'm a prophet. I know I'm supposed to do what you say. So Jonah got up to obey the Lord. And what does it say? It says, and he went to flee. And now don't miss the irony of this moment. There is Nineveh, which is due east of Israel. And Jonah goes to Joppa, which is west, to get on a boat. So he turns about face and he goes to Joppa. Now, don't miss also, not only does he not go to Joppa, he gets and he pays to ride on a boat to go all the way to Tarshish. Now, I'm sure you guys know where Tarshish is. But back then, the Tarshish was basically like saying Timbuktu. And so Jonah got on the boat and he was going west, as far west as civilization knew. Tarshish was the end of the map, the end of the line. See, Jonah wasn't just disobeying God. Jonah was openly rebelling from God. God said, go east. Jonah said, I'm going to get as far as I can west. I'm gone. The Lord ain't ever going to find me. And in these texts, you also see, notice what had to happen for Jonah to rebel like this. He went down. He went down. God said, get up. And then he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare. And he went, what does that word say? Down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. Continuing on, verse 4. But the Lord threw a great wind onto the sea. And such a storm arose on the sea that the ship was threatened to break apart. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, what are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish. So now we meet these sailors and this captain. And it seems like that the sailors and this captain, they're doing what pagans do. They experience signs they can't explain, right? They're seasoned sailors. And there's this massive storm that seems to get thrown out of nowhere. And so what do? They start trying to make the best of the situation. They start trying to tie down the sails. They start trying to tie down the rudder. And that's not helping. So they say, man, we're going to die. So they start throwing their livelihood into the sea. It's like, hey, we're going to make money or we're going to live. So like we choose live. And so they start throwing their livelihood into the sea. Meanwhile, I'm sure the captain was going down to get another box. And what should he discover? But in the lowest point of the vessel, at the very belly of the vessel, someone is sound asleep. And it's Jonah. I mean, now, isn't it ironic that in spiritual rebellion, how quickly we fall asleep? We go down and we go down and we go down and then we become numb. What is this? Pagans are lost, but they're seeking honest action. Pagans are lost, but they are seeking honest action. Verse 7. Come on, the sailors said to each other, let's cast lots. Then they'll know who is to blame for this trouble we're in. So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us, who is to blame for this trouble we're in? What is your business, and where are you from? What is your country, and what people are you from? He answered them, I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were seized by a great fear and said to him, what have you done? The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he had told them. So they said to him, what should we do to you so that the sea will calm down for us? For the sea was getting worse and worse. See, the sailors come, and in this moment, Jonah says, well, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the God of the Hebrews, the one who made the sea and the land. Wait, I'm sorry. You worship the God of the Hebrews? Because it just doesn't seem like a whole lot of worship has been going on. A lot of rebellion, a lot of disobedience, a lot of choosing to not hear or see what God's activity is doing. But you're not worshiping God. No matter who God is, you're not following him. And it should give us a moment of pause because this guy's supposed to be the prophet. He's supposed to be the one that speaks for the Lord. Thus saith the Lord. That's the role of a prophet. But this prophet, he can't seem to even realize that, like, his hypocrisy is showing. And so, in this moment, he says, well, I am a Hebrew and I worship Yahweh. I worship the God of the Hebrews. And what happens to the pagan sailors? They freak out. They say, this is who you worship is God? The one that made the sea and the earth? And we already know, like, you're on his bad side. You've told us. You've been running from his presence. And don't miss this. At no point does Jonah say, I'm sorry. Or does he turn to God and say, I should surrender. I should be worshiping you. Instead, it's the pagan sailors that say to Jonah, what must we do to be saved? It says, what do we have to do to you to get the storm to go away? If this is God and God is angry at you, and what must we do to be saved? Because see, many times, pagans have a lot going on. You and I, we've lived in seasons of paganhood, where we've been distant from God. We don't know what to do. We don't know what we're searching for. We're just looking for some kind of craving fulfilled or meaning brought to our life. And we don't know where to put the name. And we don't know where to put the emphasis. We don't know where to put the intention. But what we want in the core of who we are is something different, because this ain't working. We want something different because this ain't working. Jonah responds. He answered them, pick me up and throw me into the sea, so that it will calm down for you. For I know that I am to blame for this great storm that is against you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land. But they couldn't, because the sea was raging against them more and more. So they called out to the Lord. These are pagan sailors. They called out to the Lord. Please, Lord, don't let us perish because of this man's life. And don't charge us with his innocent blood. For you, Lord, have done just as you have pleased. Then they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea. And the sea stopped its raging. The men were seized by great fear of the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. The third point is this. Prophets need saving, but have a hard time being vulnerable. See, Jonah seems selfless in this moment, right? In fact, Jonah seems to be doing a lot of seeming, right? He seems to be worshiping Yahweh. He seems to be a prophet of God. He seems to be someone that should be in the know of spiritual things. But really, Jonah, his hypocrisy and his hardened heart have detached him from the work of the Lord, to the point that he's dead asleep in the bottom of the boat when the Lord moves on the waters above. And again, we go to the pagans, and we see these pagans, that they were witnessing this. And they just say, Lord, save us. Don't hold this against us. We're going to do what you've asked us to do. We're going to obey. We're going to trust. And it's so crazy. In the book of Jonah. Now remember, this is a book written to Israelites by Israelites. Verse 16. The men were seized by great fear of the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. I want you to understand that for a second, okay? In this time period, the way you made a sacrifice and you worshiped a deity is you went to their temple. So you showed up at their temple. So what had to have happened is these pagan sailors got their boat to land, got off of their boat, and went and found a temple of Yahweh in which they could worship and make sacrifice and make vows. So these pagan sailors give up the way they're going to go and find the answer that they are looking for in Yahweh. It says they sacrifice and they worship and they make vows to him. Meanwhile, Jonah's sinking. And we think that, he's a pretty good guy. He threw himself in, saved the pagans. But many times it's hard to be vulnerable when you've been such a hypocrite. You think, I'll just keep my way and it'll all work out for me. And so Jonah in this moment says, I got the perfect idea. If I can't go west, I'll go down. Dying would be better than preaching to the Ninevites. So throw me in the water. God will be satiated. I'll die and not have to preach the message. And everything will be just as I want it. But it's not about what Jonah wants. It's about what God desires. And God will allow breaking, change, stretching in anyone's life if it leads us to say, save us, Lord. If it leads us to call out to the Lord. Jonah 1:17 says this. The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So, Jonah is sinking, and it should give us a moment of pause. Because up on the water, the pagans, those who really shouldn't understand who God is, are worshiping. Jonah, the prophet of the Lord, is sinking. He makes his living from God. He talks about God. He does what God desires. But he's now sinking into a watery grave. I should give you pause to chuckle. That maybe God doesn't value the same things we value. That, for many of us, we have unwritten rules about religion or Christianity or, like who's holy and who's not holy. But in this moment, God has taken the pagans and they, because of their tender hearts, have said, save us, Lord. And Jonah, because of his hypocritical, stubborn heart, is now sinking into a watery grave. But I don't want you to miss it because our story is going to continue. We're going to learn more about God isn't done with Jonah yet. But there still has to be a moment of salvation. And so Jonah is experiencing God's faithfulness too. Ready? Verse 17. And gulp. The Lord appointed a giant fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. See, Jonah experiences God's faithfulness in the big fish. Now, Jonah has a lot to learn and to experience to come. But in this moment, the moment of salvation, the moment Jonah thought, okay, I'm as good as dead, God saves. God saves. So no one is out of the reach of God. No one's out of the reach of God. Are you a pagan? Have you done a lot of stuff that you're regretful of? You look around and you realize, I don't even know what I'm doing in this life now. I really don't. I'm trying to figure it out, but I just keep breaking more stuff. And I just need an answer. And I feel judged. I feel scared. I don't want to come back because I'm afraid that God's going to punish me, not save me. You are not out of the reach of God. God wants to save. Are you teachable? Are you humble? Are you willing to give up going your way and choose his way? Or whether you're a prophet. And for years and years, you've thought, oh, I've got everything figured out. And I know what I'm doing. But on the inside, you're like a tomb. You've got all the veneer, but one crack will shatter you. The beautiful thing is, no one is out of the reach of God. He will save. He will save. He will save. It's no mistake that this is the theme right here at the beginning of the book of Jonah. But my question for you this morning is, where are you at in that process? Have you given up control? Have you given up your rights? Have you given up your direction? Have you given up your understanding to Jesus? Jesus loved this story. In fact, there's a moment, we're going to learn about it next week, where Jesus stands up to the Pharisees and he says, hey, you want to talk about what I'm doing in my ministry? I'm not going to give you anything but the sign of Jonah. Jesus is a way. Jesus is the way. Jesus is the truth. And Jesus is the life. And that's why nobody is out of God's reach. If you're here this morning and you want to make a decision to follow Jesus, I'll be standing right here and I can help you understand and move towards that. If you're here and you want to join the church, you want to join a life group, you can come talk to me about that too. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Also in the room at the doors, we'll have deacons, and they are willing to pray with you this morning. If you have a prayer for illness or a family member or just something that you need prayed over by someone powerful and righteous and effective, God will honor that prayer, and we want to be available for you in the room for that. But let me pray for us, and then you decide as you sing, what is your choice of decision? Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for loving us this morning, God, and thank you for Jonah 1. Thank you that you taught us that no one is out of your reach. Whether we are a pagan or a prophet, whether we came in by accident or we came searching because we're just so lost. The power of Jesus, your love, God, is that you are willing to save. It's in your name we pray. Amen.